Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets podcast. It is the 13th of June. We have Brent crude oil half asleep, I'd say, at 82.32, down a little bit this morning, but ultimately, as we were saying in the Goldilocks space now, after recovering from that OPEC Plus forum or OPEC Plus meeting turbulence, it now seems to have come right back to where it's been sitting comfortably. Let's welcome Adi Imsirovic, Director of Surrey Clean Energy, and also a Senior Associate at the CSIS. Adi, obviously we're kind of in the hangover this morning of the yet again Fed noise yesterday. I'm wondering today, will the Fed in the second half, will they, won't they? Will that be bearish or bullish for prices in the second half as we sort of look for other signals than OPEC supply policy?
Morning, Sean. I think what Fed is going to do is the key to the oil price, and not what OPEC will or will not do. At the moment, we're going into the third quarter, so fundamentally, demand should be up by about 1 million barrels. So I think what we saw during the OPEC meeting was a little bit overdone on the downside, a little bit too bearish. I think the market, I still believe we'll see $90 by the end of the year. But the Fed decision is the key. I think if we get the second cut, which is still a big if, I think it's going to be very positive.
Say that again. If the Fed give us more than one cut?
Absolutely, yeah. At the moment, I think market is still pricing in one cut, probably before the elections, either way. But with the data we saw yesterday, I think the market rallied a bit on the back of a belief that there is a slight opening in the door for potentially a second cut, and that macro situation. Well, the inflation rate seems to be relatively tame. I think it was very good news for Biden.
Trying to buy a loaf of bread in the supermarket, and then you might think it's not so tame.
Well, I guess so.
Sorry to interrupt. Sean, your audio is a little bit low. If you can keep your audio
if I
higher.
swallow my microphone.
Yes,
okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. I was just saying that the impact of inflation is such that, of course, it doesn't go away. It might stop rising as much, but the whatever 20-odd% rise over the last 3 years is still in a loaf of bread.
But the numbers are 3.3%. It's not the end of the world. When you have a target of 2%, 3.3% is not too bad. Inflation is probably, it's all about expectations. The numbers we saw yesterday are a little bit better than expected, I think. And there was a little bit of sort of good news and good feeling in the market. Now, can the stock market go much higher on the back of that? Probably, it's a really big question mark. But overall, I think macro situation is a little bit more positive. I think that is going to help crude oil on the back of fundamentals, which should improve as well. I think that there's nothing particularly crazy bullish out there, but I think, given where we were, I think the market should pick up. I mean, pretty much everyone I spoke to yesterday, and I spoke to some pretty good people in the market, expect about an extra 1 million barrels of demand coming in now in Q3, and that should sort of sort things out. For example, what's situation on the ground, Sean, is that finally Nigerian barrels have cleared up in June. Now, hey, it's a pretty low bar to clear up June loading barrels in June, but situation is better. Angolan barrels have cleared up mainly in July as well. You're getting some more bids in the window for Brent. It's not brilliant. I saw yesterday a fixture of a Libyan cargo going to Hawaii. So sweet crude is still not particularly strong. I don't know whether that fixture is going to go through or not, but my old colleagues are being that cargo. So what can I say?
It's have a nice time when they get there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a barrel of crude and you could choose any place to go to, it might be Hawaii.
Absolutely. Some good golf out there. And
Let's go to Omar El Abeidli, Director of Research at the Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies. Omar, I'm sort of thinking about that sort of bullish flavor that's come back in the markets in the OPEC meeting and the rate cut cycle that started last week with the Canadians and then the ECB, and now some sort of warmer signals. Sorry, I have to hold my mic up. Warmer signals from the Fed to at least one cut this year, sort of being quite supportive, one would think. Certainly a floorboard, if not a rocket to launch prices higher. But what could be, and I'm keen to get your insights on, is this deal, this peace agreement that Hamas and US and Israel and Egypt and Qatar are trying to put together at the moment. And what is your outlook for that deal? And B, if it was, what impact do you think it would have in terms of outlook for the second half, optimism and a sense for support to the markets?
Well, very briefly, just to add to Eddie's comments, I would say that in addition to the normal economic considerations, the Fed is in self-flagellation mode because it lost a lot of credibility during the last cycle when the inflation spiked, and now it's going through purposefully a period of overcorrecting just to sort of regain credibility, which is why we may not get the additional rate cuts, even though they would normally be logical. Going back to your question about the deal, I'm afraid I'm quite bearish about the deal, not because it might not materialize. I think it's probably likely to materialize. However, I don't think there's a lot of belief or credibility in that both sides will, lay down arms for a protracted period of time following the conclusion of the deal. The only thing at the moment that seems to be inducing restraint among Israelis, IDF, is the presence of the hostages as a bargaining chip. And if that bargaining chip is surrendered, it's difficult to imagine Israel not finding another reason to start reinitiate its operations. And as an indication, we saw yesterday, I believe, an attack on southern Lebanon, taking out a Hezbollah commander, which resulted in a retaliatory rocket fire. So I think it's a very clear indication from Israel that whatever it signs on in terms of paper may be quite different from what actually ends up materializing. And really the basic problem is there's not much of an enforcement mechanism. The only enforcement mechanism we have at the moment is the hostages, and if they're gone, we're a pretty grim place. Now, what this implies for growth, I think, is just people probably realize all of this. The region doesn't exactly have a glittering record when it comes to stability and post-war settlements. So what will happen is that whether a deal is struck or not won't have much of a change because everybody expects it to fall apart very quickly thereafter.
Yeah. Frank Kane, editor-at-large at the Arabian Gulf Business Insights. Frank, I'm thinking, as we are now 10 plus days after the OPEC Plus meeting, back in the sweet spot of the oil price. Is there any legacy, do you think, from this OPEC Plus meeting? Have we just digested it and moved on, or is there still, is it the reason we have recovered? I mean, what's your thoughts 10 days out of the legacy impact and meaning of the OPEC Plus decision?
Yeah, hi Sean, thanks, and nice to be on again. Haven't been on for a while. I mean, I usually wait until I read Robin Mills' verdict on these things. Rather than reading the OPEC or the Saudi press release, I wait for Robin Mills. And Robin in the National today thought generally that it was a pretty good thing. It would lead to, decreased volatility in prices in the coming months, and a bit more flexibility by the producers to, ratchet up or down as they saw fit. So, that's a verdict I think worth looking at. My own sort of take going forward is that we seem to have developed a new kind of power nexus within OPEC Plus, don't we? This group of 8, the producers who were called to Riyadh for separate physical meetings that were held in the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh, they look to be quite and an important force going forward. If these barrels are to be brought back on from October, then presumably it's in the gift of these eight producers to do that. And if the plan is to be, as I say, paused or delayed, then it's also in their gift to do that too. So I think that's an interesting, long-term potential development there.
Especially when you consider all of the countries with the idle capacity, or at least most of half of the members of that eight with that idle capacity.
Yeah, well, that's right, and also the ones that are deemed to have done the heavy lifting in the cuts, Saudi, UAE, in particular, are deemed to have done their bit so far. So their incentive will be to bring them back on, I think. The role of Russia is still an enigma wrapped in a mystery inside a riddle, whatever the Churchill quote was. And I still think there is potential for Russia somewhere along the line to derail things within OPEC Plus. They have other motives in their calculation of the oil price. They have a water fund, and that's an overriding thing for them.
Adi, just picking up on that, I mean, listening to your earlier comments, as you say, taking the soundings of your market friends yesterday, plus million barrels of demand in the third quarter. Have OPEC got this right? I mean, the Great Eight, as Frank referenced there, they're talking about putting back barrels from October, but it's only 500,000 barrels in the fourth quarter. It's not all 2.2 million. Your thoughts, Adi, on the outlook for demand to be sufficient enough to support the return of new barrels in the second half of the fourth quarter?
Well, I think OPEC did what they probably, it was I think overall it was not a bad meeting for OPEC. I think they were fairly realistic. And I think what they decided, OPEC is in a difficult position. A very, very hard position.
When you say OPEC, do you mean OPEC Plus?
No, listen, Sean, this OPEC Plus is a joke.
Yeah. Okay,
I just don't even want to talk about Plus. Plus is Russia. And Russia will do what Russia wants to do, as Frank just said. So for anyone, any market observer, any market observer should really focus on OPEC. This Plus thing is a joke. It's a political thing that, Russia will play their games. Russia need cash, and Russia will produce as much as they can without disrupting things too much, because they do want high oil price. So, as Frank said, it's UAE and the Saudis who basically carry the whole burden, and it's not an easy burden to carry. If you look at it, I looked at some numbers yesterday. I haven't read the IEA report yet, by the way, but I've sort of got some snippets from discussions and some press. I mean, you've got Norway is going to increase production by, about 250,000 barrels next year. Okay. You've got most of the supply is coming from the Americas. By 2030, if I remember correctly, IEA expect the Americas, which is basically Guyana, Canada, US, Brazil, Argentina, they will contribute supply by about 5 million barrels. So this is
by 2030. By 2030.
By 2030, they alone can.
That's only a few days away.
Absolutely, it's not. It's around the corner in a way. So basically, I think OPEC has to sit down and think this through very, very hard. What
are their options, do you think, Eddie, in that sense? I mean, just to finally once and for all open the taps and blow all these people away?
I think so. That's what I would do. I know it's radical. It's a nuclear option, but I don't think we should take it off the table. If I was Saudi and UAE, I would just say, okay, well, the capacity is there to do it tomorrow. And just say, look, enough is enough. I mean, we're not going to. I mean, come on. You've got by the end of the decade, you've got. I think Norway is increasing their production by at least 500,000 barrels, and that's a lot from a very, very high cost producing area. So why would OPEC put up with that? Supporting prices for all these guys, they have far higher costs to come into the market and simply sell their oil. So this strategy will have to be rethought at some stage. But for now, I think, you know, demand will save OPEC for the next few months. I think they'll be fine. So as soon as that happens, I think we'll see the sort of sweet, as you said, Goldilocks sort of oil price between $80 and $90. There'll be solid demand. Summer season is there. You know, the market is looking okay. So that will be forgotten. But this is still something that OPEC has to, you know, face next year, come Q2 next year, and weaker demand. Again, what is going to happen with oil price? You know, we're talking about $70 again. So that's problematic for countries like Saudi Arabia that need more like $100 for their budget.
Omar, I wanted to get, again, just looking at the geopolitical neighborhood. Obviously, we've the ongoing Israel's attack on Gaza, and that creates a lot of turbulence in the neighborhood. But on the counterpoint to that, and somewhat surprisingly, it would appear, unless the Wall Street Journal is not to be trusted, this deal between Saudi Arabia and the US, a sort of security pact that was very much on the table pre-October 7th, seems to be still very much on the cards now, and the reporting in the last few days of the Wall Street Journal that it's rather imminent. Your thoughts on that as a deal? What would be its principal building blocks, and where would it take us?
Yeah, I mean, so the Saudi strategy of, you know, reaching out to Iran and reaching out to China, and probably not coincidentally Bahrain reaching out to Russia a couple of weeks ago as a you know, mediator, or as in its relations with Iran, I believe has borne fruit in forcing the US's hand. The US still has significant interests in the region, is painfully aware of the fact that it's being outflanked by China and Russia in the region. And Saudi Arabia has intelligently played its hand and forced America to have to adopt policies that it might not normally like to regarding its security guarantees. And what's going on in Israel and Gaza with the Red Sea attacks on the Houthis, which has been a demonstration, and then also the missile attacks on Israel by Iran, has been a demonstration, a proof of concept, so to speak, that the US is willing to intervene. Maybe not at the level that some countries might want, but it is willing to intervene. When push comes to shove, something is available and is consistent with the domestic political environment in the US. So now that's what the Saudi Arabia has been looking for since 2019, in particular after the Baqeq attacks and after various attacks on its civilian infrastructure by the Houthis and the Iranians, or whoever it was.
In terms of just to sort of get to the nut of it, in a way, that a security pact between Riyadh and Washington, at the same time that Riyadh has a fundamental economic pact with Moscow on OPEC Plus, can those three coexist in the same bedroom, so to speak?
So, well, I mean, I think the reality is that, you know, the Middle East at the moment looks like Europe circa sort of 1910, with all the sort of contradictory alliances and secret pacts and you know, explicit pacts and détentes and so on and so forth. So no, overall, I think you're absolutely right. This it's not just specific to this trilateral relationship. Most of the relationships in the region with inside powers and outside powers are fundamentally incompatible, and the stage is set for a big showdown at some time in the next 10 years. Hopefully it won't come to that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. These things don't fit together properly, and usually that's a harbinger of you know, a deterioration in the security environment. And to be honest, that's what we've been seeing very clearly for the last 5 years. And if this deal is struck, there may be some short-term respite, but the fundamental contradictions that you clearly alluded to are still there. And I don't see, you know, the only way I can see a good resolution in the short term is if the Palestinian two-state solution is given, you know, proper consideration by the US, is supported properly by the US in the West, and is actually, you know, gets up and running. that's the only sort of short to medium term way to avoid, as far as I can see, a significant regional violent escalation.
Frank, you were recently in Azerbaijan last week, and that's a place that has to deal with a lot of these sort of 1910 contradictions that Omar references. They have a slew of them there. Your thoughts with Azerbaijan at the energy? What was the narrative there? What was obviously they're 6 months away from COP28. It's a critical corner of the world on the Caspian. We got Iran on one side, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Russia, and so forth.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was there. It's always a pleasure to go to Baku. It's a fascinating place, and I was there for a thing called the Baku Energy Forum. But I also took the chance to go and see some government people relating to the COP29. You know, they are staging COP29 there in November. You know, the latest episode of the COP global circus. But it's really interesting what's happening there. There was a much bigger international presence at this forum than I thought there would be. You know, it's run and organized by SOCAR, the Azerbaijan Oil Fund, but there were lots from the Middle East there. There were lots of Americans there. I was quite surprised. You know, the Atlantic Council was quite big there, as regards COP29, I can reveal something to you. They are going to hold it in the National Olympic Stadium, which I think is probably a first for a COP.
In a stadium, like in an open air stadium.
Yeah, this is a 80,000 seater sports stadium. They will have to build an awful lot of stuff within it, you know, to have plenary halls and meeting rooms and everything.
Oh,
but
okay.
You know, these things are normally held in exhibition halls and business centers, you know. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. But you know, it seems to me, and talking to government people there, the Azeris agree that they have all the problems that the UAE faced, you know, last year at COP28, plus a few of their own. You know, they are a petro state, so therefore the Green Wing will be against them, you know, running the COP in the first place. They have a mixed human rights record, he said euphemistically, you know, much like the UAE has as well. They have added things like, for example, a perception of corruption in the West. You know, they'll have to deal with that. And they have the geopolitical situation all around them. You know, they just fought another war over Nagorno-Karabakh, where with Armenia, they won. But they're also wedged between Russia and Iran, and Turkey's in the picture too. And then the whole eastern side of that is what's called the Middle Corridor, you know, this new Silk Road route coming from China, that the Azeris are hoping to attract business along that route rather than the north or south routes. So it's all
certainly emerging as a really critical corridor for all of those sort of geopolitical reasons, but also new energy supply into Europe, given the post-Russia-Ukraine.
That's right. Yeah. Sorry, let me just also mention that there was quite a big EU presence there too, because of the deals that they've done with European countries to supply gas,
right,
you know, long-term gas supplies to replace Russia, and that won't please the Russians, of course. I didn't notice any Russian presence there, which is interesting as well.
They're not at the best of friends at the moment. Let's go to the survey question, which is looking at this idea of the Fed. How will won't they Fed cut rates impact markets in H2? Will it be bullish or bearish? Will they, won't they Fed cut rates? Bullish or bearish in H2? Ding, 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 ding. Adi, I wanted to get your thoughts because we talked about it a little bit yesterday, but none better place than yourself to give us your insights on it. The oil price at the moment back in its Goldilocks position, and you mentioned that the IEA report yesterday, and ultimately the OPEC report on Tuesday, the IEA report on Wednesday, are massively apart in their demand growth outlook for the year. We're halfway through the year, and it's 1.1 for the IEA and, by the way, the American EIA, and we're 2.2 still, holding on to that for OPEC. What do you think the market is pricing in? Which one of those two? And does that divergence present any turbulence in the second half, or who's getting it wrong?
Well, I mean, it's very clear. It's OPEC's getting it wrong, and by a big margin. And it's not, I think
said that demand's going to grow quite dramatically in the third quarter.
It will, but basically we've seen very little growth so far in second quarter. So really, what we are going to do is we've seen probably about 500,000 so far, another million, a little bit plus, over 1 million. I mean, I've seen it, like, for example, I spoke to Paul Horsnell, SocGen. He actually, he's super bullish. He thinks there'll be deficit, or i.e. stock draw in Q3 of about 1.9 million. I think more likely it's going, personally, I think it's just going to be probably over 1 million, plus 500,000 early on this year. So it's about 1.5 million overall demand growth for this year. And it's not very often we put
decent.
Sorry?
It's pretty decent.
Well, it's pretty decent, but it's not unexpected. I mean, and it's not 2.5, which is roughly what OPEC is asking or actually expecting. And the reason very often we kind of, it's very fashionable to put IEA against OPEC. Well, it's not really. Let's look at EIA as a third party. They see demand growth even less so than IEA. So, when you put IEA, EIA on one side and OPEC on the other side, it really, there's a glaring sort of a difference. And just, I think it's really bad, because I think OPEC Secretariat have some very, very good people. I think these numbers are coming top down rather than bottom up from the analysts. And this sort of Joe Boning, the sort of the oil price by advertising some big numbers can only go so far, and I think the risk is they are going to lose their credibility with these numbers.
Although they did do pretty well last year. I mean, they did get a lot of it right last year. And I on the stage last week in Russia at the Economic Forum, the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, the OPEC Secretary General was pointing out that demand growth in the first quarter was quite solid here for what was a weak quarter.
Yes, yeah, no, I mean, fair enough, but I mean, look, as I said, I think OPEC secretaries have some very, very good people. I mean, it's a good organization. I think 2.5 million is still looking very, very, very high.
Yeah, it's surprising that they didn't revise it a little bit, at least, given we're halfway through the year.
Well, and I think that's simply because the numbers are coming top down rather than bottom up from the analysts, and which is a bit of a shame, because their numbers, as you said, I mean, these are the numbers that we always looked at. They're good numbers worth looking at. So we'll see. But anyway, as I said, I think third quarter is going to be strong, but it's already being priced in. So we're in the Goldilocks, I think, in sort of mid 80s, and at some stage we'll see 90 as well, I think.
Let's go, Omar Baidley. I wanted to get your thoughts. I mean, I keep coming back to you for the sort of geopolitical insights. What's happening in Europe, Omar, looks quite interesting, if not turbulent, as this French election goes forward. Your thoughts on the shift to the right in Europe, Omar, relevance for the Middle East? We can see what it might have relevance for Ukraine, but what kind of relevance would it have for the Middle East? Your thoughts?
So I think that, I mean, what we're seeing is, since this wave of globalization started in the, I'd say, early 90s, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, fundamentally what we're seeing is, I think, a rejection of multiculturalism. I think Europe has had, and the UK have together had a deep experiment with multiculturalism, and in the eyes of many voters in Europe, it has failed. These societies have not, from the perspective of many voters, adapted and to having migrants from lots of different parts of the world, and they want to. I'm sure they are cognizant they can't go back to what it was in the 80s, but they don't want a continuation of the current trends. What does this imply for for the Middle East? So in terms of the direct consequences, it means probably a more hawkish foreign policy, less of the sort of integration, lower immigration. Actually, economically, it probably does benefit at least the Gulf countries, if not the entire Middle East, because it creates economic opportunities for the Gulf countries to exploit that would, where they'd normally be competing with Europeans. For example, I was just talking with Frank before we started, that, many, of the world's rich and famous are probably much more likely to migrate to the GCC now than they would have been in Europe. And the numbers are adding up now. We're not talking about one or two, film stars or, actors. So I think there's a lot of capital heading to that region because this is fed up with the way society and the economy is being run in Europe.
Well, let's give Frank the last word on that, and just picking up on that point, Frank, and taking it into the UK, which of course is about to have its election, and this swing to the right in Europe. It seems that the centre has held it to a certain extent, centre right, but the left, the Greens, have been smashed across Europe. What does that tell us for the outlook for Europe, for the UK, and this point that Omar mentions that the Middle East or the Gulf could benefit?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that I'd agree completely that multiculturalism has failed. If you go to London and many other cities in the UK now, they are real global places, cosmopolitan places. Sure, look, there have been problems over the past 2 decades, and a lot of that has related to the geopolitical problems in the Middle East, which has had knock-on effects in terms of local populations in the UK and other parts of Europe. It has radicalized people on both sides, So I think it's too early to say that it's failed. But you're right, Sean. Yeah, the Greens have been knocked off the park, really. And look, I mean, maybe that's a good thing. Now we can talk some sense about energy transition, rather than adopting ideological, standpoints that don't really make much sense. I wonder how far Starmer will drop more green policies that Labour has made totems over the past, 5 or 6 years. Labour seems to, the UK now seems to be very much out of step with Europe. Going left while the rest of Europe goes right, doesn't it?
Well, I'm not sure Keir Starmer is left. I mean, it just strikes me as I'm not really sure what he is, to be honest, other than I would never vote for the guy.
He's as left as Blair was in '97.
Is he?
Yeah,
okay.
I think he is, yeah. I think
so that's kind of like right of
slightly to the left of the Hun.
I would describe him as not a conservative. That's about the only thing.
Yeah. Who would you vote for, Sean?
In the UK?
Tell me, yeah.
I suppose you have to go local. I mean, you all live in constituencies. I'm sure there's good candidates. The first past the post thing is a bit of a tough one, isn't it, at the end of the day? Because unless you pick the winning horse, you've got no horse, right? So I would go local, what it means for you in whatever constituency you live, and whoever feels like resonates the most with your principles and your priorities. But what we have to principally and priorities right now is get off the air because everybody has to get back to work. And Brent crude oil is trading at 82.34, sort of stuck in that nice little spot there. I suppose if it stays there for the rest of the year, all producers will be happy. And to a great extent, you would think all consumers will be happy. Will there be anything to come along to blow it in either direction again? It doesn't seem in the first half of the year has done that, although there was a climb above 90 in April, obviously, with the trauma around Iran, Israel, but that seems to have backed off now. So let's see. Adi Asirovich, as always, rock star in the UK. Vote for us all. Frank Kane in Dubai and Omar Obeidly in Bahrain. Thank you, guys. Great insights, and catch up with you all soon again. Thank you.
All the best, guys.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.